Hello everyone, I am Mr. Midnight. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's case. Story 1.
It was a cold autumn evening in Asheville, North Carolina. The Blue Ridge Mountains stood like dark sentinels in the distance as a thick layer of fog drifted slowly over the quiet residential streets. Porch lights glowed dimly through the mist, and the town, known for its peaceful charm and artistic spirit, was settling into nighttime silence. Inside a small craftsman-style house on the edge of town, 31-year-old Emily Parker finished her nightly routine. She locked the front door, checked the windows, turned off the living room lamp, and set her phone on the nightstand beside her bed. Emily worked as a marketing coordinator for a local real estate firm. She lived alone, valued her independence, and was known by friends as cautious, private, and thoughtful. That night felt no different from any other, but unknown to her, someone had already entered her world in a way she could not yet see. Someone had been watching her, someone who had been planning this moment for months. Emily had grown up in Raleigh, the youngest of 3 sisters, in a disciplined, structured household. Her parents were school teachers who instilled in her a strict sense of routine, personal safety, and self-reliance. From a young age, Emily learned to be observant, careful, and prepared. She excelled academically, gravitating toward business and communications. After college, she chose Asheville for its slower pace, creative atmosphere, and mountain isolation. She wanted distance from the noise of larger cities and from a difficult relationship she had ended during her final year of college. In Asheville, she built a quiet life. She worked during the week, spent weekends hiking, reading, or visiting local cafes, and kept her social circle small and close. She enjoyed solitude. It made her feel safe. In the summer of 2021, Emily met 39-year-old Trevor Lang at a parking space downtown. Trevor introduced himself as a freelance photographer who traveled for contract work. He appeared polite, quiet, and professional, slightly awkward, but not unsettling. He complimented her work laptop stickers, asked about her job, and mentioned he was offering discounted professional headshots to local entrepreneurs to build his portfolio. Emily hesitated but eventually agreed. The photo session was brief and uneventful. They shared light conversation. Trevor thanked her and followed her on social media afterward. Emily thought nothing of it. To her, it was a single interaction in a city filled with artists and freelancers. But to Trevor, it became the beginning of something far darker. Trevor became fixated on Emily almost immediately. He studied her online activity with obsessive focus. He memorized her schedule from her posts, learned where she liked to hike, what coffee shops she visited, the times she typically left for work, and when she returned home. He began positioning himself in places where he knew she would be, appearing at the same cafes, on the same trails, in the same parking spaces. Each encounter was staged to feel natural. Each time he played the role of coincidence. At first, Emily believed it was chance. Asheville was a small city. Overlapping paths were common, but as weeks passed, the coincidences grew harder to explain. Trevor's messages became more frequent. At first, they were polite and brief, asking about her work, her interests, complimenting her photos. Emily responded slowly, then less often. She was not interested, but she saw no immediate threat. When she stopped replying altogether, Trevor's tone shifted. His messages became longer, more emotional, occasionally frustrated. He asked why she was ignoring him. He asked if he had done something wrong. Then he began showing up unannounced in places she had not publicly posted about visiting. That was when the unease began to settle in. By early fall, Emily felt watched. Trevor referenced details about her life that she had never shared with him directly. He mentioned conversations she had only held in private with friends. At first, she tried to rationalize it, assuming mutual acquaintances must have spoken about her. But deep down, something felt wrong. She blocked him on social media. She stopped responding entirely. She hoped silence would end it. Instead, it only escalated. Anonymous notes began appearing on her car windshield, always unsigned, always unsettling. The notes referenced her daily routines, her late-night phone calls, the groceries she bought, even the book she had recently started reading. Emily reported the notes to local police. Without a known suspect or direct threats, there was little they could legally do. Still, officers documented the incidents and advised her to remain vigilant. Emily installed security cameras around her home, added motion-activated lights, changed her phone number, and began varying her daily routine. She took different routes to work. She changed the times she left the house. She stopped posting real-time updates online, but the feeling of being hunted never fully left her. Trevor viewed these precautions as a challenge. Each barrier she erected only fueled his determination. He began planning more carefully. He studied her security system from a distance. He learned when neighbors were home and when they were. He observed her routines with clinical precision. He rented a small, isolated cabin nearly 40 miles outside Asheville under a false name. He stocked it with restraints, supplies, and equipment. To him, the plan was no longer abstract. It was becoming real. On the evening of November 6, 2021, Emily returned home earlier than usual after leaving a friend's house. The fog was dense. The street was unusually quiet. Her porch light was on. Her front door was locked. Nothing appeared out of place. What she did not know was that earlier that day, Trevor had broken into her garage while she was at work and slipped inside her home. He waited for darkness. He waited for silence. Shortly after Emily entered her bedroom, the electricity in her house suddenly cut out. The lights went dead. The quiet hum of appliances vanished. The air seemed to drop in temperature. Emily froze for a moment, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. She reached for her phone when a shape emerged from the shadows of her hallway. The attack was sudden and violent. Emily fought with everything she had. She screamed. She kicked. She struck blindly in the dark. Furniture crashed to the floor. Glass shattered. She managed to break free once and ran toward the front door, her hands shaking as she reached for the lock. But Trevor caught her, dragged her back inside, and restrained her. Within minutes, she was forced into her own vehicle and driven away into the mountains, the town lights fading behind her. The next morning, Emily did not arrive at work. Calls went unanswered. Messages remained unread. By midday, her coworkers contacted her oldest sister. Her sister drove to Emily's house and found the front door slightly open, the living room in disarray, and blood smeared across the floor. Police were called immediately. Within minutes, the quiet street filled with flashing lights and officers in gloves documenting the scene. There was no doubt Emily had been abducted. Detectives moved quickly. Surveillance footage from neighboring homes showed Emily arriving just after 9 p.m., her car leaving again at 10:03 p.m. Traffic camera data confirmed the vehicle heading east toward rural mountain territory. Digital forensic teams accessed her phone records and online accounts. One name appeared repeatedly in her messages and blocks list: Trevor Lang. When police searched his known address, they found the apartment nearly empty. Only a single laptop remained. Inside were folders labeled with Emily's name. Hundreds of photographs taken without her knowledge, maps, schedules, detailed notes documenting her habits. It confirmed what investigators feared. This was not random. This was obsession. This was planning. Search teams flooded the mountain region. Helicopters scanned the terrain. Officers checked remote roads, abandoned properties, hunting cabins. With every passing hour, urgency grew. The cold mountain temperatures reduced survival chances. Time was working against them. Inside the cabin, Trevor attempted to break Emily psychologically. He told her no one was looking for her. He told her her family had moved on. He told her she belonged to him now. He alternated between threats and false affection, attempting to control her will as much as her body. But Emily listened carefully. She observed everything: when he left, when he returned, what he touched, what he forgot. She stored every detail in her memory. On the third night of captivity, Trevor made a fatal mistake. He left Emily alone, believing isolation and fear had defeated her. Emily worked silently for over an hour, contorting her hands until the restraints loosened. When she heard his vehicle leave the property, she ran. barefoot into freezing darkness, through dense forest, over rock and mud. Branches tore at her skin. She did not stop until her lungs burned and her legs collapsed beneath her. Just before dawn, a utility worker driving a rural logging road spotted her collapsed near the shoulder. Hypothermic, injured, barely conscious. He stopped and called 911. Emily was rushed to the hospital, alive against overwhelming odds. Using her description of the cabin and terrain, tactical units located Trevor that same day. He attempted to flee but was captured after a short pursuit. Inside the cabin, authorities recovered restraints, weapons, written plans, surveillance equipment, and months of documentation detailing Emily's life. The evidence was undeniable. Trevor Lang was charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, stalking, unlawful surveillance, burglary, and multiple related felonies. During trial, prosecutors revealed the full scope of his obsession. Digital records showed he had monitored Emily for 8 months. Footage, messages, notes, and detailed surveillance timelines left nothing to doubt. The jury needed only hours to reach a verdict, guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Emily spent months recovering physically and years in psychological therapy. The trauma did not fade easily. Nightmares haunted her. Crowds terrified her. Silence frightened her most, but slowly she rebuilt her life. She moved to a new city, changed her identity online, built new routines. Over time, she found her voice again. She began speaking publicly about stalking awareness, digital safety, and early warning signs. Her survival became a symbol of resilience. A reminder that even in silence, danger can grow, and in strength, lives can be reclaimed. Story 2. It was just after midnight in the quiet river town of Hannibal, Missouri, when the first 911 call came in. The Mississippi moved slowly in the darkness, black and silent beyond the levee, and most of the town slept beneath a low blanket of summer heat. The caller's voice trembled as he struggled to form words, breath hitching between panicked gasps. A woman had been found unconscious in the driveway of a small rental home on the edge of town. She was bleeding heavily, barely breathing, and alone. By the time first responders arrived, floodlights illuminating the narrow gravel drive, they realized immediately that this was not an accident. This was the end of something that had been unfolding in silence for nearly a year. 28-year-old Claire Donovan had moved to Hannibal seeking escape rather than adventure. After ending a turbulent relationship in St. Louis marked by emotional exhaustion and control, she wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere anonymous, somewhere the past could not easily reach her. Hannibal felt small enough to disappear into. She found work as a veterinary assistant at a local animal clinic and rented a modest one-bedroom house near the river, a place with peeling shutters, creaking floors, and a narrow porch that faced a stretch of trees instead of neighboring homes. Claire was gentle by nature, known for her patience with frightened animals and her soft-spoken kindness with people. She rarely went out at night, kept a limited circle of acquaintances, and spent most evenings at home with her adopted rescue dog, Milo. Her life was simple, predictable, safe at least. That was what she believed in those first quiet months. 3 months after moving to town, Claire met 41-year-old Victor Hale at the clinic. He brought in an injured stray dog he claimed to have found near the highway. The animal was badly malnourished, fearful, and covered with healed scars that suggested neglect far older than a roadside injury. Victor lingered long after the exam ended, standing too close to the counter, watching Claire with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He asked questions that drifted from the dog's condition to her personal life, where she was from. How long she had lived in Hannibal, whether she lived alone. Claire gave vague answers, polite but guarded. She told herself he was simply lonely. Victor began returning to the clinic frequently over the next several weeks, sometimes with the same dog, sometimes with new animals that always appeared injured or sick. Each time he requested Claire specifically. The other staff members joked that she had a fan. Claire forced a smile, though unease grew in her chest. Victor's compliments slowly shifted from neutral to personal. His questions grew increasingly detailed. He somehow always knew when she was working late, when she was closing, when she would be alone in the building. Soon, Claire began to notice Victor in other places. At the grocery store, lingering at the end of each aisle she visited. At the gas station, parked 2 spaces away, watching her through his windshield. Once she noticed his truck idling across the street from her home when she returned from work late one evening. When she told herself it was coincidence, the word felt hollow even in her own mind. Then came the note. One evening after returning home, Claire found a folded piece of paper slipped beneath her front door. It was unsigned. It only read, "You look tired today. You should rest more." No date, no signature, just those words written in careful block letters. Claire changed her locks 2 days later and ordered a set of small security cameras that same night. She reported Victor to her manager at the clinic. Together they agreed to no longer schedule her alone when he had appointments, but Victor found ways around it. He began calling the clinic repeatedly, hanging up without speaking. When Claire blocked his number, the calls came from new ones. Then the gifts started appearing, flowers on her porch with no return address, bags of dog food she had never ordered, small boxes with handwritten notes that grew more personal by the week. Fear crept steadily into every corner of her life. Claire filed a police report. An officer visited her home, took notes, and examined the camera installation. Without direct threats or physical contact, there was little law enforcement could legally act on. Like many victims before her, Claire was advised to remain alert, to document everything, and to call immediately if she felt in danger. She began sleeping with the lights on. Milo rarely left her side. Victor's behavior escalated rapidly after that. On August 14th, Claire failed to show up for work. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her coworkers initially assumed she had called in sick. By afternoon, concern rippled through the clinic as unanswered calls continued. When her landlord attempted a wellness check and found the front door unlocked, police were called. Inside, the home was eerily quiet. Milo trembled beneath the kitchen table. Claire's purse lay open on the counter, wallet still inside. Her shoes were by the door. The security camera near the back window had been torn from the wall. In the bedroom, shattered glass littered the floor beneath the open window frame. There were no signs of a struggle inside the house. It was as if Claire had simply vanished. Police immediately classified the case as a suspected abduction. Detectives retrieved what footage remained from the surviving cameras. At 2:17 a.m., a hooded figure appeared at the edge of the backyard. 1 second later, the camera feed cut to black. Cell tower records showed Claire's phone traveling west toward the rural outskirts of the county before abruptly going silent. Only one name matched the growing profile of fixation, surveillance, and disappearance: Victor Hale. When officers reached Victor's listed residence, they found an abandoned house, utilities disconnected, furniture stripped, dust layered thick across the floors. But behind the home, concealed beneath a corrugated metal roof, stood a locked shed. Inside, investigators uncovered a chilling archive. The walls were plastered with photographs of Claire taken from a distance, walking Milo, unlocking her car, leaning over the clinic counter, sitting alone on her porch. Some photos were printed with dates written in red marker beneath them. Maps were pinned to the wall, routes traced in ink, schedules, work shifts, grocery visits, and one phrase scrawled again and again in Victor's handwriting: "She will understand soon." Search teams were deployed immediately. Volunteers, deputies, state troopers, and air units flooded the surrounding farmland and river basin. Helicopters crisscrossed the sky. Dive teams searched the dark waters of the Mississippi. With each passing day, hope thinned, but Claire was still alive. Victor had transported her to a storm shelter buried beneath the remains of an abandoned farmhouse nearly 30 miles outside of town. The entrance was disguised beneath collapsed machinery and overgrowth. Underground, the bunker was small, dry, and lined with sound-absorbing insulation. He kept her restrained in darkness, feeding her just enough to survive, telling her each day that no one was looking for her. He claimed the police believed she had run away. He said her dog was dead. He said her life was now his. But Victor underestimated her resolve. Claire observed everything. The pattern of his visits, the creak in the metal door, the faint tremor in the earth when trains passed in the distance, the changes in air pressure when storms rolled through. She memorized the time between visits, the moments of silence, the precise weakness in one of her restraints. On the 10th night of captivity, Victor left abruptly after a phone call visibly unsettled him. In his haste, he failed to secure the second lock on the storm shelter door. Claire worked in silence for nearly an hour, forcing swollen hands through the loosened restraint until blood flow returned in waves of agony. When she finally pushed the heavy door open, white daylight blinded her. She ran. She ran through tall grass, through mud, across broken fencing, lungs burning, heart racing, with no sense of direction, only the primal knowledge that stopping meant death. Nearly 2 miles later, she collapsed on the edge of a gravel farm road. A passing truck spotted her and stopped. The driver recognized her instantly from the missing person alerts broadcast across the county. Claire was alive. Hours later, using fuel purchases and cellular bounce pings tied to the mysterious call Victor had received, authorities located his temporary hideout at a remote roadside motel in western Missouri. Tactical teams surrounded the building. Victor attempted suicide during the entry but survived and was taken into custody alive. Investigators soon uncovered Victor's long history of stalking across 3 states, multiple restraining orders, women who had moved suddenly, disappearances that ended just short of criminal charges, patterns of obsession that had never before escalated to full abduction until Claire. His trial drew national attention. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of premeditation, psychological manipulation, and violent captivity. The underground shelter, the surveillance archive. His private journals. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all major charges. Victor Hale was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Claire spent months in physical rehabilitation and years rebuilding her sense of safety. She relocated under a legal name change, never again returning to Missouri. She later worked quietly with national advocacy groups, helping victims who were once told, as she had been, that there was not yet enough evidence to act. And in Hannibal, Missouri, along the slow current of the Mississippi, residents learned that the greatest dangers are often the ones that appear calm, patient, and ordinary, until it is already too late. Story 3. It was just past midnight along the coastal highway outside Tillamook, Oregon, when a passing truck driver noticed something unusual. The thick fog had settled over the winding road, obscuring the cliffs and swallowing the orange beams of his headlights, but there on the side of the road was a car parked at an odd angle, engine running and the driver's door ajar. No footsteps led away from the vehicle. No one was visible in the dense mist. A chill crawled up the driver's spine as he pulled closer. Something wasn't right. He dialed 911 immediately, describing what he saw, voice tight and shaky, words tumbling out faster than he could control. Emergency dispatchers sent officers and paramedics to investigate, unsure of what awaited them in the darkness. 24-year-old Emily Carter had lived a life marked by quiet determination and careful planning. She had left Sacramento seeking a fresh start, away from the chaos of an ended marriage and a life weighed down by arguments, lingering mistrust, and the constant reminder of heartbreak. In Tillamook, she found solace in a small seaside town that overlooked the gray, restless waters of the Pacific Ocean. Emily worked the night shift as a clerk at a modest motel perched on the edge of the cliffs, a job that allowed her to support herself while remaining largely invisible, existing quietly in a routine that required little contact with others. She was careful, polite, and considerate, earning the respect of her employers and the appreciation of travelers who passed through town. Her evenings were her own. She walked the beach with Milo, her rescue dog, sometimes hours at a time, watching the surf curl and crash against the rocks, headphones blocking out the world, the rhythm of the waves matching the rhythm of her heart. For months she lived this way, small, unremarkable, safe. Then came Martin Rowe. He checked into the motel under the guise of work in the area. 42 years old, tall, with a commanding presence and an unsettling intensity in his eyes, he carried an air of authority that Emily instinctively noticed. At first, it seemed harmless. He brought in a stray dog he claimed had wandered from a nearby highway, asking for treatment and attention. Emily performed her duties professionally, but she noticed the way he lingered, watching her every move as if memorizing her gestures. He asked questions that slowly crossed the line from casual curiosity to personal interest, where she had lived, who she had spoken to, and eventually whether she lived alone. Emily answered politely, cautiously, never letting him see the unease growing in her chest. Over the next several weeks, Martin returned repeatedly, always with some pretext: an injured animal, a concern about a sick pet, sometimes nothing at all, simply waiting until Emily approached the counter. His timing seemed calculated, always arriving at her shift, noticing when she swapped shifts with coworkers, inquiring with too much detail about her days off. Emily told herself he was lonely, perhaps obsessive, but harmless. She avoided confrontation, relying on politeness to keep interactions brief and uneventful. Yet she could feel his eyes following her long after she walked away, and there were moments when his smile felt more like a warning than a greeting. Then the gifts appeared. A small seashell tied with string left on her car windshield, a scarf carefully draped across the motel counter, a voicemail, the sound of heavy, slow breathing with no voice attached. The first time, Emily laughed nervously, unsure what to make of it. By the third, a deep, gnawing unease had settled in her chest. She changed her routes home, avoided walking the beach alone, and even began double-checking her locks. Still, Martin's presence was a shadow in her life she could not evade. He called repeatedly, using disposable phones and blocked numbers. Each time, the call would end before she could answer. Emily filed a police report. Officers came, took notes, and examined the motel's security camera system. Without physical assault or direct threats, authorities were limited in what they could do. They advised vigilance, careful documentation, and immediate calls should anything escalate. Emily followed every recommendation. She installed additional cameras, kept a detailed log, and tried to go about her work as normally as possible. But on the night of February 3rd, Emily vanished. Her car was discovered along the foggy coastal highway, parked haphazardly near a tree line. The driver's side door was open. The engine still hummed faintly in the cold night air. Inside, her phone lay shattered. Her wallet was gone, shoes left by the door. Nothing else indicated struggle, yet the scene carried the unmistakable tension of a life interrupted violently. Search parties were mobilized immediately: law enforcement, volunteers, Coast Guard units along the coast, and K-9 teams scouring the forests. The fog and darkness hampered efforts, swallowing sound and sight, making each moment feel heavier than the last. Security footage from the motel showed Emily leaving early, a calm look on her face, phone in hand, after receiving a call from a disposable device that could not be traced. Her departure seemed ordinary, casual, and yet entirely sinister. Within hours, law enforcement realized they were not dealing with a random disappearance. Patterns began to emerge. Martin Rowe's name appeared repeatedly in connection with temporary work, coastal towns, and women who had recently relocated or were in transitional phases of life. In 3 previous cases spanning multiple states, women had vanished under eerily similar circumstances, each incident remaining unresolved. Emily, however, was alive. Martin had transported her to an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the inland forests, 30 miles from the coast. The cabin had no power, no running water, and no phone service. Inside, it was cold, damp, and silent, with locked doors and boarded windows. Martin told her that no one was searching, that people disappear every day, that no one would question her absence. He claimed he controlled everything: the outside world, her friends, even the tides. Emily had no choice but to comply outwardly, hiding fear behind a mask of acceptance while plotting escape in secret. For nearly 2 weeks, she observed him. Every creak of the floorboards, the rhythm of his steps, the way he handled keys, the subtle noises that hinted at moments of vulnerability. She memorized the lock's weakness and waited for a stormy night when Martin would be distracted by incoming calls and weather disturbances. And when that night arrived, when wind rattled the windows and rain hammered the roof, Emily made her move. Bloodied, exhausted, and soaked through, she forced the lock open and ran into the forest, branches slashing at her face and arms, mud clinging to her legs, lungs burning with each desperate breath. Hours later, near a logging road, she collapsed. A forestry crew discovered her, hypothermic but alive, and called authorities. The manhunt that followed was immense. Helicopters scoured the forests, K-9 units traced his route, and state and federal investigators coordinated to track Martin Rowe's movements. 2 days later, he was apprehended in Washington, attempting to cross state lines in a stolen utility truck. In his possession were multiple false identities, GPS devices, and journals meticulously detailing the movements of women across several states, including notes on Emily's schedule, habits, and routines. Martin Rowe was later convicted on charges of kidnapping, identity fraud, and attempted murder. His sentence, multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. Evidence suggested his involvement in other unresolved disappearances, though the victims were never recovered. Emily relocated under a legal name change, leaving the coast, the fog, and the memories behind. Years later, she quietly advocated for victims' rights, working with organizations to ensure that other women in situations of obsession and stalking could receive help before it escalated to violence. And yet, along the Oregon coastline, when the fog rolls in from the Pacific and headlights disappear into white mist, residents remember the night a car waited on a deserted highway, engine humming, driver's door open, and a young woman vanished into the shadows, only to return, scarred but alive, bearing a story that would change a community forever. Story 4. It was a cold evening in mid-November along the suburban streets of Columbus, Ohio. Streetlights flickered through the fog that had settled over the quiet neighborhood. Inside a modest brick home on the corner of Willow Drive, 29-year-old Rebecca Harris was preparing dinner, her toddler son playing in the living room, and the aroma of roasted vegetables filling the air. Rebecca was meticulous, organized, and fiercely protective of her small family. She had grown up in Ohio, attended college locally, and had returned home after working for several years in the city. Her life was ordinary, peaceful, and entirely predictable until the man named Lucas Carter entered it. Lucas was 35, a former firefighter who had been medically discharged due to a back injury. Tall, charming, and seemingly dependable, he quickly captured Rebecca's attention when they met at a community fundraiser for local families. At first, Lucas was helpful, courteous, and attentive. He seemed like the kind of man anyone would trust, a neighborly figure who knew the area, volunteered at events, and carried himself with calm authority. He told Rebecca he had recently moved back to Columbus after several years traveling for work and was looking to put down roots. She was intrigued by his confidence and the way he listened, seemingly genuinely interested in her stories, her dreams, and the small details of her day-to-day life. Their courtship moved swiftly, yet cautiously. Rebecca, recently divorced, was wary of rushing into anything. But Lucas had a way of making her feel special, of noticing things no one else seemed to, how she liked her tea, her favorite childhood songs, the way she organized her son's bedtime routine. He called often, brought small gifts, and seemed genuinely invested in her family. Over time, she allowed him closer, inviting him into her home and trusting him around her son. But beneath the charm, Lucas was not the man he claimed to be. Soon, Rebecca noticed subtle changes. He would arrive unannounced, insisting on helping with errands or household tasks. He questioned her about every interaction she had with friends or neighbors, subtly implying judgment if she didn't answer to his satisfaction. When she tried to assert boundaries, he became sulky, distant, or quietly manipulative. He would criticize her in front of others, remarking on her parenting, her cooking, even the clothes she wore. What began as small acts of control escalated quickly. By late October, Lucas's behavior became overtly threatening. He would call her phone dozens of times a day, leave voicemail messages filled with anger and accusations, and sometimes threaten legal action if she did not comply with his demands. When Rebecca attempted to block his numbers, he would send emails, messages from new accounts, and sometimes show up at her workplace under the guise of checking in. Fear replaced curiosity, anxiety replaced comfort, and still she remained hopeful that the man she had once trusted could be reasoned with. On the evening of November 18th, Rebecca received a knock at her door. Lucas was there carrying groceries, insisting on helping prepare dinner for her son. The polite smile was gone. In its place, there was a tight-lipped tension and a coldness that made Rebecca's skin crawl. That night she tried to enforce boundaries, telling him he could not stay. He left quietly, but later text messages arrived. Threats thinly veiled as concern, warnings wrapped in affection. By the early hours of November 19th, Rebecca's phone displayed multiple notifications. "You're making a mistake. I can't lose you. This is your last warning." The next morning, Rebecca never arrived at her job at the nearby community center. Friends and colleagues began calling her phone, but it rang unanswered. By late afternoon, concerned neighbors called the police after noticing her son unattended in the backyard, playing quietly but unsupervised for hours. Officers arrived to find the home largely undisturbed, but Rebecca was gone. Her car remained in the driveway. Her purse and keys were inside, untouched. The windows were locked. There were no signs of a struggle, only a sense of absence that seemed to vibrate through the walls. Investigators quickly traced the last known communications from Rebecca's phone. They discovered multiple texts from Lucas that morning, each more urgent and insistent than the last. A pattern emerged. Lucas had been controlling her actions for months, meticulously planning her movements, waiting for a moment when she would be alone and vulnerable. Officers obtained a warrant for Lucas's home. When they arrived, they found it immaculate, almost sterile. Everything appeared normal until they checked his computer. There were maps, schedules, and lists detailing Rebecca's daily routine, including work hours, favorite walking paths, and times when her neighbors would be absent. It became clear that her disappearance was no accident. Lucas fled the city hours before the police arrived, taking no personal belongings except a backpack containing what would later be identified as materials for abduction: rope, restraints, and a knife. Over the next several days, law enforcement conducted an extensive manhunt across Ohio, coordinating with neighboring states. Reports from gas stations, convenience stores, and highway tolls showed sightings of a man fitting Lucas's description. Every lead was followed, every tip investigated. Still, Rebecca remained missing. Meanwhile, Rebecca fought to survive. Lucas had taken her to a remote cabin in the Appalachian foothills, a place isolated and difficult to access. There was no running water, no electricity, and only basic provisions. He monitored her constantly, leaving her no room for escape. But Rebecca's resolve never broke completely. She observed everything, memorized the layout of the cabin, the sequence of locks, and the timing of Lucas's absences when he ventured into town. Each night she whispered to herself, planning, calculating, waiting for a storm or a moment of distraction. On the seventh night, during a violent thunderstorm, Lucas became distracted trying to secure the cabin roof against the wind. Lightning illuminated the area in brief, jagged flashes. Rebecca seized the opportunity. Using a piece of wire she had concealed, she unlocked the door and ran into the forest, the rain drenching her, mud clinging to her clothes, roots and rocks threatening to trip her at every step. For hours she ran blindly, guided only by instinct, the sound of water rushing downhill, her lungs burning, adrenaline propelling her forward. Finally, she collapsed near a logging road where a truck driver found her and called authorities. Lucas, meanwhile, had driven for hours through the back roads, eventually reaching a motel on the outskirts of Cincinnati. Surveillance footage captured him paying cash for a room, requesting privacy, and leaving within hours. Law enforcement, now coordinating a multi-state pursuit, tracked his cell activity to no avail. He had switched phones, used burner devices, and avoided surveillance cameras as much as possible. For nearly a week, Lucas remained at large, a ghost slipping through the cracks of modern technology. Eventually, a tip from a motel clerk led investigators to the abandoned cabin near the Appalachian foothills, confirming Rebecca's account. Evidence collected there linked Lucas to multiple criminal offenses: kidnapping, unlawful confinement, assault, and possession of illegal restraining equipment. Forensic analysis revealed DNA traces and fingerprints that matched Rebecca's and confirmed the timeline she had described. Lucas was apprehended in a rural area near Dayton, Ohio, attempting to cross into Indiana with forged identification. His capture was the result of coordinated surveillance, tips from the public, and digital tracking of his devices. At the time of his arrest, he carried cash, 2 cell phones, and detailed notes regarding his surveillance of Rebecca and other women he had targeted in the past. Investigators later discovered that he had been planning abductions for several months, meticulously documenting his targets and practicing routes and escape plans. In court, Lucas was convicted on multiple counts, including kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. His sentence, 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Rebecca testified quietly, her voice steady but emotional, describing the ordeal, the fear, and the moments that had nearly broken her. She returned to her family, eventually moving to a new city for privacy, while working with advocacy groups to help victims of stalking and domestic abduction, ensuring that her experience would prevent others from suffering the same fate. The community of Columbus, Ohio, never forgot the case. Neighbors who once believed their streets were safe realized that threats can come in unexpected forms, often disguised as familiarity and charm. On foggy nights when headlights cut through mist along Willow Drive, those who knew the story remember a woman who vanished into fear but returned with courage, leaving behind a message of vigilance, survival, and resilience. Story 5. It was a crisp autumn evening in Portland, Oregon, the kind of night when the wind whistled through the trees and the streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the sidewalks. Inside a small townhouse on Southeast Stark Street, Emily Sanders, 32, was finishing her dinner, her cat curled up beside her on the couch. Emily had grown up in a quiet, stable home, raised by her mother, a school librarian, and her father, an accountant. Her childhood was ordinary, filled with weekend trips to the coast, school plays, and piano lessons, but she had always been careful, reserved, and wary of strangers. Her life had been orderly, structured, and predictable until Derek Lawson entered it. Derek, 37, had a far different upbringing. Born in Seattle to a father who was often absent and a mother struggling with mental health issues, he learned early to manipulate, charm, and control to get what he wanted. As a young adult, he moved from city to city, holding various tech jobs but leaving a trail of broken friendships and short-lived romantic relationships. When he arrived in Portland, he sought a fresh start but brought with him the same patterns that had haunted his past: charm masking obsession, attention masking control, and affection masking dangerous intentions. Emily and Derek met at a charity auction in downtown Portland in early 2016. Emily was volunteering for a literacy initiative, and Derek attended as a sponsor. At first, he seemed polite, attentive, and genuinely interested in her life. He asked about her students, her hobbies, her weekend plans. He laughed at her jokes, remembered small details, and offered help whenever possible. Over the next few weeks, he sent thoughtful notes, flowers, and small gifts, each carefully calculated to build trust. Emily, cautious but hopeful for companionship, allowed him into her life. Their relationship moved quickly. Derek's attention became daily text messages, late-night phone calls, and weekend visits. Emily introduced him to her friends and her elderly mother, and for a time he seemed genuine, a man who could be trusted. But the early signs of manipulation were there: subtle criticism, jealousy over harmless interactions with coworkers, and small tests of control disguised as concern. Emily's intuition warned her, but Derek's charm and outward success masked the growing danger. By late October, the warning signs escalated. Derek would call dozens of times a day, send voice messages filled with anger and veiled threats, and appear outside her workplace unexpectedly. Emily tried to set boundaries, speaking with friends, coworkers, and eventually filing a restraining order. Derek, however, always found ways around the restrictions, never truly leaving her alone. Emily's world shrank, her routines monitored and manipulated until fear became a constant companion. On November 3rd, Emily received a package at her door. Inside was a small notebook filled with detailed notes tracking her daily life, what time she left for work, her evening routines, and even when she went to bed. There were sketches of her neighborhood, notes about nearby exits, and calculations about how long it would take to intercept her car. Panic overtook her. She realized Derek had been meticulously planning something for weeks, if not months. Authorities were notified, but before they could intervene, Derek had already set his plan in motion. That evening, Emily left to pick up groceries. As she approached her car, a shadowy figure stepped from behind a hedge. Derek, holding handcuffs and a small knife, blocked her path. She tried to scream, but he covered her mouth, whispering threats and warnings. He forced her into his car, blindfolded and gagged, and drove toward the outskirts of the city, along dark, twisting roads lined with dense forest. Emily remained silent, noting every turn, every mile marker, and every detail of the car's interior, silently preparing for an escape. Derek brought Emily to a small, abandoned cabin deep in the forest. The building was derelict, with broken windows and overgrown weeds, but Derek had stocked it minimally with food, water, and blankets, enough to make it seem plausible that he intended to keep her alive, yet enough to exert total control. He tied her to a chair, leaving her restrained but within reach of his gaze. Over the next 2 days, Emily carefully observed his patterns. She noted when he left the room, how he interacted with the environment, the placement of tools, and even how he slept. Each night she whispered plans to herself, mentally rehearsing every step of her escape. During these tense hours, Derek vacillated between anger, obsession, and twisted affection. He spoke to her in a low voice, alternating between apologies, false declarations of love, and veiled threats that made it clear that any attempt to leave would be met with violence. Emily endured, careful not to provoke him too soon, biding her time, remembering the self-defense training she had taken years earlier, and using her fear as focus. By the third night, a fierce storm rolled in, rain pelting the roof and lightning illuminating the dark forest outside. Derek, distracted by a leaking roof and a fallen tree, left the front door unsecured. Seizing the opportunity, Emily struggled free from her restraints, crawling across the splintered floor. Mud and rain soaked her clothes as she ran blindly through the forest, branches clawing at her face and limbs. Hours later, exhausted and soaked, she stumbled onto a logging road where a passing driver stopped and called 911. Law enforcement responded immediately. Emily was safe, but Derek was missing. A multi-agency manhunt began, spanning several counties. Authorities tracked his phone, reviewed surveillance footage, and interviewed neighbors, building a profile of a meticulous, dangerous man who had pre-planned the abduction. Digital forensics, eyewitness accounts, and recovered GPS data confirmed Emily's account and provided a timeline of Derek's movements following the kidnapping. Within a week, Derek was apprehended in a remote area near Salem, Oregon, attempting to leave the state using forged identification. In his possession were handcuffs, a knife, maps, and a journal detailing Emily's routines, proving the premeditation and obsessive planning behind the crime. Forensic testing confirmed his fingerprints and DNA on multiple items, tying him directly to the abduction. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. Emily recounted every detail from their first meeting to her escape, her calm and determined testimony leaving an indelible impression on the jury. Derek was convicted of kidnapping, unlawful confinement, assault, and possession of weapons used in a crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The impact of the case rippled through the community. Emily, forever changed, became a vocal advocate for victims of stalking and domestic abduction, participating in awareness programs and training sessions for law enforcement. Portland residents, once feeling secure in their quiet neighborhoods, were reminded of the dangers hidden behind charm and familiarity. Emily's survival became a testament to courage, resourcefulness, and resilience. In the months that followed, Emily shared her story widely, emphasizing the importance of intuition, early intervention, and community vigilance. Schools, workplaces, and social organizations used her experience to educate others about the signs of coercive control and manipulation. Her story became a lifeline for those trapped in abusive relationships, demonstrating that careful observation, mental preparedness, and patience could mean the difference between life and death. The case also highlighted the meticulous nature of modern criminal investigations, from digital forensics and GPS tracking to witness interviews and cross-agency collaboration. Law enforcement emphasized the need for timely reporting of suspicious behavior and thorough documentation, showcasing how vigilance, evidence, and persistence ultimately led to Derek's capture. Emily's life, though scarred by trauma, gradually began to regain stability. She returned to teaching, finding solace in her students and community work. Each day was a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity to overcome fear, reclaim autonomy, and seek justice against those who would inflict harm. And while Portland's autumn nights would forever echo with the memory of that terrifying week, Emily's courage became a guiding light, a story of survival, empowerment, and the unwavering determination to live. Story 6. It was a rainy evening in Louisville, Kentucky, the kind of night when puddles reflected the dim glow of streetlights and the scent of wet asphalt hung heavy in the air. Inside a modest suburban home on Breckenridge Lane, 28-year-old Rachel Thompson was preparing dinner for her two young children. Her husband, Thomas Reynolds, 35, had been working long hours at a local construction company, and the quiet of the house seemed to stretch endlessly. Rachel had grown up in a close-knit family, the daughter of a nurse and a mechanic, who instilled in her a sense of responsibility, empathy, and careful judgment. Her life had been orderly and predictable, built around work, family, and community. But that stability was about to be shattered. Thomas Reynolds, a seemingly hard-working and devoted husband, had a hidden history that few knew. Born in Cincinnati, Ohio, he had a turbulent childhood, marked by neglect and brief stints in foster care. As a teenager, he developed a pattern of deception, manipulation, and escalating aggression. Early relationships ended with accusations of controlling behavior and emotional abuse, but Thomas always managed to charm friends and family into overlooking his past. When he moved to Louisville in his mid-20s, he adopted a veneer of normalcy, holding steady jobs and integrating into the community. But beneath that facade, a dangerous obsession was growing. Rachel and Thomas had met at a church volunteer event in 2013. Rachel, a volunteer for a local literacy program, caught Thomas's attention when he offered to help organize donations. At first, he appeared helpful, polite, and attentive, asking thoughtful questions about her work, her children, and her family. Over the next several months, he courted her carefully, sending flowers, writing notes, and arranging small gestures that seemed innocent but were calculated to build dependency and trust. Rachel, cautious but hopeful, allowed him into her life. Their relationship progressed quickly. Within a year, Thomas moved in with Rachel, meeting her children and attending family events. At first, everything seemed normal, but subtle signs of control soon emerged. He monitored Rachel's phone, criticized her friends, and expressed jealousy over harmless interactions. Rachel dismissed the early warning signs, attributing them to his protective nature and eagerness to bond with her family, but the behavior escalated. By late 2015, Thomas's control became more overt. He insisted on knowing Rachel's schedule at all times, questioned her about interactions with coworkers, and began to isolate her from her support network. He would arrive unannounced, check her phone, and make veiled threats about the consequences of disobedience. Rachel, fearful but still rationalizing his behavior, sought guidance from a counselor and confided in close friends, but Thomas's manipulations continued. In the summer of 2016, Rachel began dating a family friend, David Carter, a kind and steady man who had known her since college. Thomas's obsession intensified. He monitored her movements, sent anonymous threatening messages, and showed up at her workplace under the guise of concern. Rachel realized that she had unknowingly triggered a dangerous escalation. On August 12, 2016, Rachel decided to confront Thomas. She planned to end the relationship permanently, hoping to regain control over her life. That evening, as rain pelted the roof and the streets glistened under the wet light, Thomas invited Rachel to discuss their future at a nearby park. Trusting him to meet in a public place, Rachel agreed, but Thomas had other plans. He had meticulously prepared for weeks, scouting isolated locations and studying her routines. As Rachel arrived at the park, Thomas intercepted her, forcing her into his vehicle with threats and intimidation. He drove her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a location chosen to prevent witnesses. Inside, the building was dark and empty, littered with broken crates and debris, but Thomas had prepared it with food, water, and blankets, enough to make it seem plausible that he intended to keep her alive, yet enough to establish complete control. Rachel was restrained, tied to a chair, and left under his watchful gaze. Over the next 3 days, Rachel endured the tense confinement, observing Thomas's behavior, patterns, and routines. He oscillated between aggression, charm, and false apologies, attempting to manipulate her psychologically. Rachel remained calm, silently planning her escape, noting every exit, every key, and every tool within reach. She whispered strategies to herself, mentally rehearsing every possible scenario for survival. Thomas, meanwhile, displayed alarming signs of obsession and escalation. He ranted about losing control, expressed envy over Rachel's interactions with David, and boasted about his meticulous planning. He left small clues about his movements, inadvertently giving Rachel the information she needed to execute a careful escape. On the fourth night, a storm raged outside. Lightning illuminated the interior of the warehouse, casting long shadows across the walls. Distracted by the noise and a loose door hinge, Thomas stepped away for a crucial moment. Rachel seized the opportunity, wriggling free from her restraints and slipping silently through the shadows. Muddy and soaked from the rain, she navigated the maze of crates and debris, finally emerging onto a service road where a passing motorist noticed her and called authorities. Law enforcement responded swiftly, securing Rachel's safety and beginning the investigation. Evidence collected at the warehouse, including fingerprints, clothing fibers, and digital devices, confirmed the premeditated nature of the abduction. Investigators conducted interviews with friends, coworkers, and family, piecing together Thomas's escalating behavior and the timeline of events leading to Rachel's capture. The manhunt for Thomas intensified as authorities traced his digital footprint, analyzed GPS data, and reviewed surveillance footage from nearby areas. Within a week, he was apprehended at a secluded cabin in rural Kentucky, attempting to flee across state lines. In his possession were items tied directly to the abduction: ropes, restraints, maps, and a journal detailing Rachel's routines and movements. Forensic analysis confirmed his fingerprints and DNA on multiple items, linking him definitively to the crime. During the trial, Rachel recounted every detail of the ordeal: the initial courtship, the escalating control, the abduction, the days spent in the warehouse, and her eventual escape. Her testimony, detailed and composed, painted a chilling portrait of obsession, manipulation, and premeditation. Thomas was convicted on charges of kidnapping, unlawful confinement, assault, and possession of weapons used in the crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The case resonated deeply within the Louisville community, sparking discussions about the signs of coercive control, stalking, and domestic manipulation. Rachel became an advocate for victims, speaking publicly about her experience, emphasizing the importance of vigilance, early reporting, and mental preparedness. Her story served as a cautionary tale and a beacon of resilience, demonstrating the power of courage and careful observation in the face of danger. Months after the trial, Rachel returned to her work and community, rebuilding her life while honoring the trauma she had endured. Her advocacy inspired changes in local law enforcement protocols, emphasizing the need for prompt intervention in cases of stalking and domestic abuse. The warehouse where she had been held became a symbol, a reminder of the dangers hidden behind charm and familiarity, and the resilience required to survive and reclaim one's life. Through perseverance, support, and vigilance, Rachel not only survived the ordeal but became a voice for others, ensuring that her experience would educate, protect, and empower those at risk. And while Louisville's rainy streets would forever echo with the memory of those terrifying days, Rachel's courage and determination left an indelible mark, a testament to survival, resilience, and justice.
Thank you for joining me here at Mr. Midnight. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious.